Let's get right into this new world order and this week's upending of foreign policy with today's terrific panel. In Mexico City, Jorge Castaneda joins me. He was Mexico's foreign minister. He's now a professor at NYU. Fawaz Gerges and Anne Applebaum join me from London. Fawaz is a professor at the London School of Economics and is a columnist for the Washington Post. And Conrad Black is in Toronto today. He was a financier and media mogul. He is now a columnist and commentator. Jorge, let me begin with you. Mexico and the United States historically had very bad relations. The United States militarily intervened many times. Mexico had a very anti-American attitude, a kind of fiery revolutionary spirit. All that changed over the last 20 years. And in fact, this is one of the great success stories of American foreign policy, a Mexico that is pro-American, become a valuable ally. Is all that likely to change? What is the mood in Mexico today after the events of the last couple of days?
Well, Fareed, for those of us who believe that this change in Mexican attitude and American attitude also from, let's say, the late 80s onward was a positive thing, what has happened the last few days is really terrifying, because where this could lead us is to a revival or a rebirth of this anti-American sentiment in Mexico, which was not unjustified. It was not something that came from nothing. It came from real historical facts. But now with what Trump has been doing, I'm afraid that this sentiment will overtake any government, whether it's President Peña Nieto's government today or the next one of 2018. It's very difficult to continue to be friends with the United States when the President of the United States pretty much humiliates you in public on Twitter.
Do you think Mexico will retaliate? After all, Mexico is, most people probably don't realize this, Mexico is, I think, the second largest market for American exports.
Well, Mexico has a lot of negotiating chips in this matter, Fareed, but it also has measures that we could take in other areas. For example, the drugs that come through Mexico from South America or the drugs that are produced here in Mexico all go to the United States. This is not our problem. We have been cooperating with the United States for many years on these issues because they've asked us to and because we have a friendly, trustful relationship. If that relationship disappears, the reasons for cooperation also disappear.
Conrad Black, let me ask you about the retaliation that Donald Trump has threatened, which is a 20% tariff. I was always taught by conservative commentators and conservative intellectuals that tariffs, taxes, are eventually passed on to the consumer. So this would not be a tax that would be paid by Mexico. It would be paid by companies, Mexican or American, that were selling Mexican goods in the United States, but they would pass that cost on to the consumer. So in other words, the American consumer would pay for this, for Trump's foreign policy. Am I missing something?
Well, I think we'd want to know more about, I mean, you really need to be a trade wonk to judge these things, so you need more detail. In principle, I agree with what you just said, but it was always clear during the campaign that Mr. Trump, in saying that he would build the wall and he intended that Mexico would pay for it, that he expected to extract that payment by reducing the trade imbalance between the two countries. There are less ham-handed ways of doing that than the straight imposition of increased tariff like this, and I assume, and I hope, and I share the wishes that Mr. Castaneda expressed, that relations can be put back together.
But Conrad, do you celebrate this talk of tariffs and potential trade wars? It's happening with Mexico, it's happening with China. I'm wondering, you've historically been a free trader. You supported Brian Mulroney when he negotiated NAFTA. Are you comfortable with this new world we're going into?
I don't think we're going into such a world. I think your president has stated clearly that he's in favor of trade. He's not particularly a protectionist, but he has reservations about some trade agreements that he feels are one-sided and were incompetently negotiated from the American side.
Anne Applebaum, let me ask you about, we have to do a kind of tour d'horizon here. But Theresa May and Donald Trump, are they ideological soulmates? Theresa May says she wants a global Britain. Trump, of course, attacks globalism every chance he gets.
I think in your exchange with Conrad Black, you've just hinted at one of the really profound problems we have here, which is that Theresa May's idea of global Britain, which is something she's come to over a number of months, looking for a new role for Britain outside of the European Union, clashes fundamentally with everything that Trump has said since he's taken office. In his speech, he was pretty clear, in his speech at the inauguration, he was pretty clear about his protectionism. He said, hire American and buy American. You know, that doesn't sound like somebody who's in favor of free trade of any kind, whether it's free trade or fair trade or anything involving foreign countries. She has come to the United States with a message that she would like to, nevertheless sell, which is that Britain and the U.S. should nevertheless go ahead and promote free trade and promote an idea of a rules-based global order. And Trump has said pretty clearly that he doesn't believe in any of that anymore, and that he's willing to throw much of it overboard. And for Theresa May, as for the rest of Europe, this is a fundamental stumbling block. That's how that system of rules-based international world order, that's made them prosperous. That's made them safe, and they would like to continue it. And this seems to be in direct conflict with what Trump says he wants.
When we come back, I will ask Fawaz Gerges what he makes of the ban on many Muslim-majority countries and the policy of extreme vetting when we come back. And we are back with Jorge Castaneda, Fawaz Gerges, Ann Applebaum, and Conrad Black. Fawaz, talk about this ban on several Muslim-majority countries, a kind of an odd collection. It includes Iraq, which is supposedly an ally of the United States, and where there are many people in Iraq who worked for the American government and the American occupation. But it does not include Saudi Arabia, of course, where the majority of the hijackers from the terrorists from 9/11 originated. What do you make of it, and what do you think the effect will be in the Muslim Middle East?
Well, I mean, it's very toxic, Farid. It's very poisonous. If Trump does act on his promises in terms of lumping Islam and Muslims with the so-called radical Islamism, preventing Muslims from, as you said, several countries from entering the United States, delivering Syria on a silver platter to Putin, this would inflame anti-American sentiments throughout the world, not just in the Muslim world, anger U.S. allies, and of course trigger a pilgrim to Russia. It would really basically unleash tremendous anti-American storms in the Middle East.
Conrad, let me ask you about this issue. I am perhaps fixated on the Iraq one, which is we went into Iraq, the United States went into Iraq, got tens of thousands of people to work and ally with the United States. I remember talking to you at previous occasions about how you felt that it was dishonorable for the United States to have not done more for the South Vietnamese, who were our allies. We abandoned them. Well, here, wouldn't the situation be comparable? There would be thousands of Iraqis who had worked for the Americans, who had supported the American occupation, and you're now saying to them you will be rewarded by having a blanket ban, that you couldn't even come and visit this country that you worked for and supported at great personal peril?
Yes, I think that the American attitude to reception of refugees as a concept has been ungenerous and unsuitable. I, however, cannot blame the government of that country, any government, this administration or the previous one, to the extent that they wish to take all the reasonable precautions they can to prevent the admission into the country of those who will be destructive of it once admitted. And you have to handle this, I think, with more diplomacy than it has been in the first week of this administration. I think if the Senate gets on with confirming the nominees to the senior posts in the administration, it'll smooth out a good deal from what we've seen this week. It's been a bumpy week, but I think things will get better.
Fawaz, you wanted to say something?
I doubt it very much. I fear that things are going to get much worse. Remember, Donald Trump traffics in a clash of civilizations narrative. He talks about Islam hates us, all Americans. He lumps radical Islamism of Al-Qaeda and ISIS variety with Islams and Muslims. He has this bipolar attitude toward the Muslim world. I fear myself that if, again, Donald Trump keeps acting the way he does, that this really basically, the Trump administration might speed up the end of America's moment in the Middle East and unleash also, I mean, this violates American values. You're talking here about American values, lumping all refugees with terrorists. Imagine just the idea itself. So it does not look good. And I also fear that there are many contradictions and big holes in Trump's pronouncements on the Middle East and the Muslim world. He wants to defeat ISIS, yet he lumps Islam and Muslims, 1.3 billion Muslims, with radical Islamism. How do you bridge this particular, conceptual divide? It looks very bad from where I am sitting here in Europe and the Middle East as well.
And Applebaum, the Trump-Putin connection. You spend a lot of time in Eastern Europe. You have a house in Poland. How do Poles, for example, how much are they worried that in hoping for some kind of deal between Trump and Putin, Poland and its security, Ukraine and its security, the Baltic states and their security will be sacrificed?
I think there is a palpable fear of exactly what you've just described. And the expression that people are using is, will there be a new Yalta? In other words, will Putin convince Trump to divide the world, perhaps Europe, perhaps the Middle East as well, into spheres of influence that allow him to impose his political system on one part of it and keep the rest for some whatever remains of democracy or of Western civilization. There's talk of that in Russia. It's bleeded over and seeped over into Ukraine. People are hearing it, and they're very worried about it. This is a part of the world also. You mentioned allies. Poland, the Baltic states, much of Central Europe, even Georgia. These are countries that contributed soldiers and troops to U.S. missions in the past, that feel very much themselves to be part of NATO. They're supporters of NATO. They've been supporters of American foreign policy for 25 years. They've supported, both Democratic and American presidents, and they will feel incredibly betrayed and left alone if they're cut out of some new division or some new redrawing of borders in Europe.
We're going to have to leave it at that. We will have many opportunities, I think, to discuss this new foreign policy going forward, and we will be back.